Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Here to talk about the new Bambi remake plus the Winnie the Pooh remake. Two Disney classical movies that are being reimagined or remade currently or going to be remade and re-released. And at first, when I heard about this story, I was confused because I'm like, how can they do that? Um, you know, how can they, at least what's going on, how can they reimagine these stories when they're part of Disney's intellectual properties? But I was informed through Lisa that these are public domain entities. These are not Disney properties like The Little Mermaid, which I also found out Disney took advantage of being public domain at that time. You know what I mean? When they made it in 1989. But I don't have necessarily a problem with taking public domain stories like A. A. Mills, Winnie the Pooh, and reimagining or remaking them. But I think keeping them keeping them a certain feel or the certain, to use a French phrase, je ne sais quoi about them, a certain flavor of them is appropriate. Like they want to make Bambi a killer in the new one. And I'm just like, why? I mean, Bambi is a story. It was created in the 19th, it was the book that became public domain, that is public domain, was initially a story about a coming of age story about a deer who loses its mother. And it was a way for children to cope with loss, a film that was used to explain, death to kids. You know what I mean? In ways they could understand, in terms they could understand. Making him a killer is counterproductive to what they were trying to achieve in terms of the narrative. Because now the death of the mother that horrified kids when the movie first came out is now going to be justified, especially if they're not going to pick up where it left off. And maybe they will say that the deer Bambi was traumatized by the death of its mother, and that's why he turned evil. But if they don't say that and they try to just reimagine the whole story, then it doesn't really make any sense. You know what I mean? It really comes off as, okay, now you're making a pro hunting movie. And that could be politicized. That could be politicized in the climate that we live in, especially with these all these debates. And we've seen it before on the channel here. Lisa and I have gotten to it a few times about the Second Amendment. They could essentially make a hero out of these hunting guys, these kind of creepy hunting guys that be having deer on their deer faces on their walls and shit, and using promoting animal cruelty. The makers of the film could be seen as promoting animal cruelty, and that is not good. You know what I mean? You might say, "Oh, well, that's stupid. Who's going to take a movie and use it to justify real life?" Well, I point you to 1915's Birth of a Nation. It was this film by W.D. Griffin in 1915, one of the first films ever made, that was used to promote the second rise of the Ku Klux Klan. I point you to movies like The Dark Knight Rises in 2008. The story of that film was used to promote gun violence that resulted in the Colorado massacre in 2012. And there are several other examples in which a movie has been used and scrutinized to promote certain political and social agendas. It's nothing new, it happens all the time. So if you take a deer that is already somewhat of an endangered species, already a target for hunters and other people that want to engage in this kind of political, uh, this kind of uh, activity using this movie could be seen as propaganda in a sense to promote a certain political agenda when it comes to like guns or whatever. And also, the movie is dark as it is. It already is traumatizing. It already is taking it down a dark path. But in terms of Winnie the Pooh using it as a the Blood and Honey remake, that remake is even worse than the Bambi thing because that has a gentle side to it. It is about children's escapism. The story, which was originally written by A. A. Mill, was really about his son, who had an imaginary bear and a bunch of imaginary characters in Sherwood Forest. So that doesn't have any sinisterness to it, but they're reimagining it in this Blood and Honey thing with Winnie the Pooh as being a serial killer. Why are they going down? My question is down such a nihilistic path, such a dark path with this rather lighthearted material. Are they trying to bring out a more sinister side to us, a more darker side, a sadder side? Some shit doesn't really need to be remade, and some shit doesn't need to be reimagined. We've seen several examples where the reimagination of certain stuff, like for example, 2001's remake of Planet of the Apes, didn't go as planned. When they went back to the drawing board and they did Planet of the Apes the way the 1968 version was, then Planet of the Apes was a better movie. The 2011 version, the trilogy. So you got to stick to certain rule bricks, like I said before in my other video. You got to stick to certain rule bricks and certain guidelines when you want to remake a film. You can't just reimagine it all wildly and stuff. You know, what I mean? That's not going to turn out well. And um, to say that you can use a movie like Bambi for a Second Amendment or pro-gun political agenda if they make the deer a villain is ludicrous because you absolutely can and probably will be used for such a thing. Um, Lisa, is there anything you wanted to add to this? Okay, Lisa is momentarily disposed. Um, she had a lot of insights and a lot of opinions on this video on this particular topic as well. What I was gonna say is that I never really found Bambi appealing at all. And we're talking about this whole political and social agendas. I happen to know that when they first made Bambi, when you can tell us from the Disney's book, the book about Disney's life. When they first made Bambi, people were thinking the exact same thing, but the opposite. People were thinking that this kind of movie was going to turn people against hunters, turn people against sportsmen, outdoorsmen in the outdoors industry as a piece of propaganda film. But now I think that the movie making the character a villain will turn the character into um, will will promote um, the opposite political agenda, will promote a pro-gun agenda, which is good. People are gonna shit on it. You know what I mean? Because this type of movie, that wasn't the agenda of this type of movie. It wasn't to be against hunters or pro hunters. It was again to explain death in a way that children could understand it in a pro nature movie, if anything. But turning him into a killer, okay, people are gonna be like, okay, fuck this deer. I don't want to deal with this deer. Yeah, let's go out and kill all these other deers. You know what I mean? Which is totally wrong because again, deers are an endangered species in North America. You know what I mean? So it can be used as a propaganda film, and it could really hurt deers. Um, yeah, and Lisa's saying, plus us 90 kids already. Yeah, the movie was already traumatizing. Most people, Bambi's mother, the death of Bambi's mother became a running joke to all classic fans of the classic Disney films because that is a metaphor for something that is overly dramatic and traumatized. Is the death of Bambi's mother. I think Mufasa's death is worse because Simba actually goes over to his dad's dead body, and pokes his dad's dead body with his paw. With Bambi, you don't see the mother die. All you hear is the gunshot. You know, it doesn't show Bambi's mother lying there dead. You know, and her dead carcass laying there. But you know, um, his the mother's death in Bambi wasn't necessarily part of the storyline. It was necessary for him to grow up and for him to experience the changings. It's like the death in Land Before Time. It was necessary for Littlefoot's parent to die because that's how Littlefoot came of age. You know what I mean? That's how that shows a marking in his maturation. But at the same time, with Bambi, that was necessary as well. But it wasn't a crucial part of the storyline like it was for Simba, because remember, Simba's whole thing was struggling with guilt and thinking that he was the cause of Mufasa's death, which is why he went away and why he didn't want to assume the mantle of kingship. Um, after his dad died, and that allowed Scar to take over Pride Rock, and that escalated the story. Bambi's thing was just something that happened, and he had to then deal with life on his own. But and grow up. It's a coming of age story. Every yeah, yeah. Like his Littlefoot's mom did die. Lamb. Wait, hold on. I'm gonna double check, guys, because yeah, listen, I was correct. It's been a years, but it's been years since I seen a Land Before Time. But absolutely, I was correct. Littlefoot's mother did die in Land Before Time, and in a lot of ways, Don Bluth, yeah, but it's very traumatic for a child to deal with the death of a parent, and it's something that happens in real life. So these kind of movies serve as a segue to talk about something way more serious. So I think these kind of movies are necessary. Um, to speak about this issue because this is not something that little kids. And my girl's another example. My girl is more for the death of a friend, more so than a parent. You know what I mean? But it's still a movie that deals with death. You know what I mean? Who can forget that scene where Macaulay Culkin's character is in the coffin and Beta, his friend, is like, saying that he's gonna need his glasses, otherwise he ain't gonna be able to see. And she goes up to the casket, and the fact that her dad, Dan Aykroyd's character, was an undertaker was even more poignant. That deals with more the death of a friend, but these other types of movies that deal with the death of an elder are necessary as well because, listen, let's face it, kids are more likely to deal, the first death they experience is more likely to be an elder, like a parent or even more so a grandparent or a great grandparent, than a peer. In the case of my girl, yeah, I mean, he got attacked by those killer bees, and he was a sick kid, so um, you know that he was allergic to everything. That was a rare case, but in these other films like Bambi, like A Land Before Time, and like uh, especially Lion King, because a lot of kids will a lot of kids will tend to think that it's their fault that their parent died. You know what I mean? For whatever reason. It won't be being trampled by hyenas like Mufasa, but it will be for another reason. Like maybe they didn't, uh, maybe they didn't do well enough in school, or they didn't, they was kind of bad or whatever, misbehaved or whatever. And they might think, okay, this is my fault that my mom or my dad or my grandparent, you know, died. But we had to, it's a way to explain to them that death is a part of life. And death is something that, unfortunately, as human beings, and as all living things, really, human beings, animals, and even plants, we will experience at some point along the road. So movies like this are necessary. Without them, we cannot grow. In all types of movies, um, in all types of stories like this, the death of a mentor character in particular is a necessary step along in the journey of life. Just like Obi-Wan had to die so that Luke Skywalker could be the Jedi he was destined to become. Just like all mentors eventually must die, you know, in order for them to grow. And that was the case in Bambi's case, and that was the case with Simba in Lion King. Lisa says these people are making the creepy Winnie the Pooh and Bambi better not touch the Lion King. I don't think they're going to touch the Lion King, Lisa, because this is the Lion King is a part of Disney's. Disney owns the rights to it. Like we said, and like you corrected me on, uh, these other ones are public domain. It's like when you use a stock photo online, YouTube can't take you down for copyright infringement because they're open to the public. With with Lion King, and we talked about this before. Lion King uh, is one of the only movies that Disney made that's original. Disney is not was not really known for making original content. Most of the movies they made, even Fantasia, which was one of their most famous ones and one of the most boring ones. Anybody that likes Fantasia, it's like Bambi. Um, I don't know. It was never my thing. Of course, I'm a Renaissance kid. You know what I mean? So I grew up in the Disney Renaissance period from 1984 to about 1989. The Renaissance period with Little Mermaid to about 19. uh, 96, 97 with Hunchback of Notre Dame, and that period of the late 80s and early 90s, the second uh, Disney wave of popularity. The first one, of course, in the 40s and 50s, I wasn't alive at all, so I don't know anything really about that period of. We rented. I used to rent a lot of those classic movies, those the first golden age of Disney classic movies, and the worst one that some kids liked and other kids didn't like was Fantasia. It was a way to introduce kids to classical music. Uh, you know, that's why Walt Disney wanted to make it a way to introduce kids to classical composers, but it didn't have a storyline. It was more like Beyonce's "Black Is King" version that she came out with a couple of years ago. So I always thought it was boring, and Bambi was along those lines boring too. Um, Winnie the Pooh was, yeah. Well, we talked about that in the Lion King video. Lisa brings up that the Lion King was inspired by Hamlet, which is William Shakespeare's play, and Kimba, the Japanese anime series, which they sued Disney for. But it was an original story in that Kimba was not anything like Simba, except with a name. And Hamlet, of course, it was switched around with lions, and there were original elements to it. So I still consider it a Disney original. Um, but unlike this, I don't see Disney ever selling the rights to the Lion King because that's their most successful. Besides being one of the only original movies that they ever created, original stories, it is the most successful Disney movie of all time. It is the pinnacle of the Renaissance era of Disney, which like I said, as a Disney fan and Disney historian, I consider it to be the best Disney era ever. People say that we're in a new Renaissance period since 2013. Frozen's 2013's Frozen, but I don't consider it necessarily a new Renaissance era because um, they're not doing classical hand drawn animation anymore. And classical hand drawn animation was what I grew up with. It's what I those like Lisa saying, these Broadway musicals inspired by the likes of uh, Howard Ashman's composition, which was his idea to do a Broadway style musical when he helped write The Little Mermaid. Um, was what really saved Disney because you guys remember we're talking about Land Before Time. Um, After 1966, when Walt Disney passed away, um, the Disney animation studios, the animation side of Disney fell apart, and Don Bluth left. And that's when he made All Dogs Go to Heaven. That's when he made Thumbelina, and that's when he made The Land Before Time. He was one of their best animators, one of the original nine old men, the Disney's core team. And when he left in the early 70s, Disney almost went out of business. So it wasn't until Jeffrey Katzenberg became the head of Disney Animation that they actually turned things around, you know. And then when Katzenberg left in '94, and he went to go found DreamWorks, and he helped make such things as Shrek, such things as The Prince of Egypt, and other things with him and Steven Spielberg. They almost they fell off again, and it wasn't until 2013 when they started really doing big things again. Because once computer animation after '95, when Toy Story came out, once computer animation, yeah, Lisa says it's the most successful musical from Disney, and the tickets are a lot of money. Well, yeah, that's why people don't like Broadway because despite being in the inner. Most people don't know this, but if you're from New York, you do. Um, Despite us being in the epicenter of Broadway, many people, many native New Yorkers, have never been to a Broadway musical, Disney or anything else included, because the tickets are a hell of a lot of money. Not, and the more successful a show is, the more economically out of reach it is for the average New Yorker. So you have a show like The Lion King, or you have a show like Wicked, or you have a show like Hamilton. The average New Yorker ain't gonna be able to afford such thing like that because it's so economically out of reach. So the reason why I believe that Broadway seems like it's so highfalutin and so pretentious is because the tickets are mad money and it's not open to the average consumer. And Lion King is no exception. Lion King is one of those musicals. And you go to Manhattan and you see, them up on billboards and stuff, but you never be able to go see them because they're too much money. you know. Lisa and I were fortunate in 2008, like we talked about in the Heights review, to actually see In the Heights, but that was before In the Heights really jumped off. I mean, before it started getting nominated and winning Tonys and everything. So um, I was watching Channel 13 one time, uh, Aladdin on Broadway. Yeah, Lisa seen that. I didn't, because again, mad money. The more successful a show is, the less likely you are to be able to have a chance to go see it if you're an average or below average income earner in New York City. So um one of our major attractions in the city is something that is inaccessible for a lot of natives. You know what I mean? A lot of, and by natives, small N. I'm not talking about Native Americans. I'm talking about native New Yorkers that live in New York. You know what I mean? The average everyday New Yorker, especially from the outer boroughs, like we are, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. I don't know about Staten Island. You know what I mean? They're pretty. Some of them are upper to high income earners. Harlem, but Harlem is, yeah, Lisa's absolutely right. Harlem is separate culturally from the rest of Manhattan, despite being in Manhattan. When people will refer to Manhattan and Harlem as two separate areas. Like they make a Broadway play about it, the Washington Heights, and people from Washington Heights can't even afford to go see it. You know what I mean? This is why nobody gives a fuck about, except out of towners, tourists, people from other cities and other countries care about Broadway. We in New York, we don't care about it because it's not accessible to us. It's right in front of our faces, and most of us have never seen a show or care to see a show, or maybe care to see one, would like to see one, but can't afford to see it. You know, so um, other people make a big deal of it, but to us, you know, most of us ain't gonna see a musical unless it comes out in the movie theaters, and they don't really come out in the theaters because they don't do well in the theaters. You know, that type of genre, the musical, despite some of the first movies being music being musicals, nobody was wants to see a musical because you know they're just considered you know not entertainment for the masses. I was watching when I learned about In the Heights. I was watching Channel 13, public access station here in New York, and that's when I learned about it. And I told Lisa about it, but it had just come out. Uh, Winnie the Pooh, no one would go see it I was gonna talk about Winnie the Pooh for a minute. Um, this movie, I really this story of Winnie the Pooh, I really like. You know, I didn't realize that it was a Disney property. I think until I was older, but I remember being getting the Disney Channel back when the Disney Channel first came out in the late '80s. It was a paid network, and it was part of the premium package. It wasn't part of the basic cable package. So my grandma got it, and I used to watch this show, Pooh's Corner. You know, and I used to love this show. you know, you know. What I mean, this was one of my favorite shows, and that was a reimagining. That was like a live action version of the original Winnie the Pooh movie, and that was a good reimagining, a good live action version. But taking it and making it a sinister version of Winnie the Pooh, the Killer, Blood and Honey. I mean, how does that really benefit the story? Yeah. Uh, the plot is Winnie the Pooh is now feral and bloodthirsty. Him and Piglet terrorize Christopher Robin. Yeah. This seems like these type of horror movies seem like okay. When we went to the, of course, every most of what I talk about and what I is late '80s and early '90s based. So when I used to go to the video store during that era, I would see movies like the Santa Claus movies that were like Frosty the Snowman Killer, low budget, really horror movies. And this what this kind of seems like. You know what I mean? It's kind of okay. Winnie the Pooh's a wild bear now. You know what I mean? A wild bear in the woods. I mean, the whole point of Winnie the Pooh is that he's happy-go-lucky. He says, "Oh bother," and things like that. What is Eeyore going to be? Is Eeyore going to be a schizophrenic now? You know what I mean? He already suffers from depression. You know, he already is depressed. You know, what's he going to be now? A schizo? You know, I mean, really, this is children's entertainment. This is not um adult style entertainment. And trying to reimagining in Hollywood never goes well. Like I said, um, Planet of the Apes 2001 version sucked. Um, when they tried to reimagine other stuff, you know, it never went well either. This is a story that was personal to the author A. Mill. Keep in mind, A. Mill was in the worst war in human history up to that point, which is World War One, and he wrote the story about his son's imaginary world as a way to cope with PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, at that time, which they didn't know that word, they didn't know that phrase, post traumatic stress disorder. You know, in the early in the 19 teens, 1920s, when he was going through it, they knew it as shell shock syndrome. And if you watch the movie based on his life, Goodbye Christopher Robin, it's showing you how he's coping with flashbacks. He's coping with um, sy- symptoms of PTSD, memories of the war, and writing this was his coping mechanism. So it was meant to be like Bambi, a happy-go-lucky story, a story about the goodness of humanity, the specialness of childhood, the uniqueness of childhood that involves imagination. Um, it was not meant to be something, you know, sinister. Like, you know, we live in a nihilistic age. We live in an age that doesn't believe in idealism. It doesn't believe in fantasies. It doesn't believe in heroes. It doesn't believe in the innocence of childhood. They want to straight up corrupt kids. They want kids to uh, believe in nothing. You know, they want kids to idolize nothing. They don't want kids to have a fairy tale world or a fairy tale life or a fairy tale existence when they're innocent kids. So they want to make everything cynical. They want to make everything ironic. They want to make everything mean and mean spirited. You know, I mean, can't we have anything? You know, I mean, they take Little Red Riding Hood um, in 2010, 2011 and make a sinister version of that. People will say, oh, well, Disney took the public domain of Frozen and they remade that into, I mean, the Snow Queen and remade that into Frozen. Yeah, but who knew about the Snow Queen? You know what I mean? That was a remote fairy tale that nobody really knew about, and Disney was able to create that in their own image. But Winnie the Pooh was something that was already out there. You know what I mean? The author already had in his mind his image about what he was going to create it about. You know what I mean? So taking that and creating that into something nihilistic and sinister was is fucked up. You know what I mean? So, um, they shouldn't do this. You know, they shouldn't do this with any of the things we've grown up with in childhood. Let childhood be childhood, and let adulthood be adulthood, and let classics be classics. Um, Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, Lisa, for contributing. Yeah, and I'm against reimagining because, like we talked about in the before video, the previous video earlier today, certain things are special to certain individuals and certain groups of people, stuff that they grew up with. So when you try to tweak with the formula and you try to mess with it and mess it up, you end up with shit. You know what I mean? You can add your own ideas, your own twist to it as a creator. You can take that sort of creative license. But I feel like it needs to be in a certain rule book and there needs to be certain rules and restrictions when you reimagine stuff. Um, Peace. Again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Keep subscribing, guys, because we love you over here. Peace.